This is how America was stolen, episode 24. Not everyone signed. After treaties became weapons, a different kind of leader emerged. Men and women who saw the paper for what it was. A slow death written in polite language. Episode 24 begins with those who refused to trade land for promises they knew would be broken. They understood something painful but clear. If peace meant disappearance, then resistance, even doomed resistance, was the only path left. These leaders were not reckless. They were deliberate. They had watched villages burned after cooperation. They had seen borders crossed without apology. They had buried children who died under agreements meant to protect them. They no longer believed in words. They believed in memory. Colonial authorities reacted quickly. Refusal itself became a crime. Leaders who rejected treaties were labeled agitators, savages, enemies of progress. Bounties were placed, raids intensified. Entire communities were punished for the decisions of their councils. The message was unmistakable: submit or be destroyed. But resistance didn't disappear, it adapted. Native nations used terrain as defense, forests, rivers, mountains that settlers could not easily control. They struck supply lines instead of towns. They moved villages rather than defend fixed positions. They turned mobility into survival. This wasn't chaos. It was strategy born from generations of knowing the land. The colonies responded with brutality. They targeted food sources. They burned crops before winter. They killed livestock. They understood that starvation succeeded where bullets sometimes failed. War became total. Women, children, elders, no one was spared. And still, some refused to sign. What terrified colonial leaders most was influence. One leader's refusal inspired others. One village standing firm reminded others that surrender wasn't inevitable. Resistance spread not just through force but through example. That had to be crushed. So the colonies escalated again. They increased militarization. They authorized preemptive strikes. They abandoned any remaining pretense of coexistence. Expansion became openly violent. This was no longer settlement. It was conquest without apology. Episode 24 exposes a truth often erased. Native resistance was not a last gasp of a dying people. It was a conscious rejection of erasure. These leaders were not fighting to win in the traditional sense. They were fighting to exist, to force the invaders to see them as nations, not obstacles. But history was shifting. Colonial populations continued to grow. Weapons improved, resources multiplied. Resistance slowed expansion, but could not stop it entirely. The cost was unbearable. And yet, without this resistance, expansion would have been effortless. The land was not taken quietly. It was fought for at every step. As pressure mounted, the colonies began to consider something even more drastic. Not just defeating native nations, but removing them entirely from desired lands. A new idea was forming, an idea that would change everything. In episode 25, we enter the beginning of forced displacement, the belief that native people didn't need to be defeated, only moved.